behind. All the windows are busted out. And it looks like a free-for-all here. And the owner shouldn't take them down. They're just trying to take care of his business. He wants to.
All right, we are on to 10.3b, operations with radical expressions. Short and sweet one here today. And so, again, our objective now, we've talked about different operations. Today we're going to multiply binomial expressions with radicals. And you'll see down the bottom sheet of your notes, we got tons of examples. Let's talk about how to do it then. First thing we have to do is use the distributive property or FOIL. If that's possible, if that's what we have to do. We know what the parentheses, FOIL, whatever you want to call it, or distributive, when you multiply everything by everything. That's what we're going to do. The second step would be then to multiply your coefficients and radicands separately. Remember, your coefficients are outside of the square root. Your radicands are the numbers underneath the square root sign. Multiply those separately. And then finally, we're going to check all terms to simplify. So combining, that means combining like terms. That means simplifying your radicals. All the things we've done so far in Chapter 10. Okay, so let's get rolling with some examples. Let's go on to letter B here. Okay, so for this one right away, we can see that we should have to do the distributive. We got your parentheses in a group, and we've got square root of 6 outside. So we're going to multiply this square root of 6 by both things. We're going to multiply it by the 3, and then we're going to multiply it by the square root of 2 as well. So when we do that, 6 times the square root of 3, we want to combine those and make it 18 because the 3 is not under a radical, the 6 is. So we just simply write it as 3 times the square root of 6. Remember, we want our coefficient first, then the radical. And then because we have a plus sign here, I know it's going to be plus. And then basically I'm looking at this one here, square root of 6 times square root of 2. Now these two are both under radicals, so we can multiply those. And the square root of 6 times the square root of 2, remember, is the square root of 12. Okay? So now we got to look, is there anything else to multiply? No. Now let's take a look and say combining like terms or simplifying. Right now with that square root of 6, there's nothing you can do. There's no perfect squares that go into 6, so we can leave that. But that square root of 12 we can mess with because we know that 4 times 3 equals 12. So square root of 4 times square root of 3. And then we know that square root of 4 is 2. So 2 times the square root of 3. And we can just bring that 3 times the square root of 6 down. And that's our final answer here. Okay. So just kind of working with operations and multiplying. Again, notice in the distributive we kept our coefficients and radicands separate. And then combine like terms and simplify. All right, let's go on to another one. How about letter D here? Letter D. Okay, the big thing to look at on this one is notice that this squared means you're going to write it out twice. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. You get the square root of 3 minus the square root of 5 times the square root of 3 minus the square root of 5. So that's what that squared means. So now it's basically a FOIL problem here. So, and it's tough sometimes to see, but if you just take a quick look, like this here is your first term. It's tough to see sometimes with the radicals, but basically we're going to just go ahead and multiply that. So first, if we FOIL it, first terms, square root of 3 times square root of 3. Since they're both under the radical, we can multiply those out to make it a square root of 9. Okay. Then we do that one again, square root of 3 times the last term over here. So again, they're inside the radicals, so 3 times 5 is 15, but we have a negative here. We got a positive and a negative, so it's going to be a negative square root of 15. And then in the middle, here, the next term times the first term here, negative 5 times 3 is going to be another negative 15, but they're under a radical, so negative square root of 15 again. And finally, the last terms here, negative square root of 5 times negative square root of 5. Well, a negative times a negative makes this a positive, and then square root of 5 times square root of 5 would be the square root of 25. Okay, so now we look to see what things we can combine, what things we can simplify, and I guarantee, you guys are probably looking at that square root of 9 saying, hey, we can get rid of that right away. That becomes a 3. But I don't know if you saw the square root of 25 over here, same deal. That's a perfect square, and it's going to be a plus 5 over here. All right. So now we're looking at the middle terms, and these are a little bit tricky if you just take a look at them. But you got to think of it again, the radicals in terms of variable. What if you had, say, do it over here. What if you had a negative x minus another x? So negative 1x minus negative 1x. So if I just, let's say I put these numbers in, negative 1x and negative 1x, what would you get there if you combine those? Well, you'd get a negative 2x. So the same deal here, you basically have a negative 1 times the square root of 15 and another negative 1 times the square root of 15. So those can be a little tricky at times, but negative 1 plus negative 1 gives us a negative 2 times the square root of 15. Okay, so be careful with those middle terms. Sometimes they can be tricky. All right, now the last thing is just to simplify or combine like terms. So if we look, we've got two constants here, 3 and 5, that we can add up to make 8. So our final answer would be 8 minus 2 times the square root of 15, because we can't break down that 15 anymore. So 8 minus 2 times the square root of 15 would be our final answer there. Again, just foiling, simplifying, and making, doing with that middle term what we need to do. All right, let's try one more. Let's go with letter E over here. Okay, letter E, 5 times the square root of 3 minus 6 times 5 times the square root of 3 plus 6. So again, we're looking at our first term. First term is this one, this whole 5 times the square root of 3. Okay, so we're going to take that, we're going to multiply it by the first term over here. So again, coefficients times coefficients, and radicals times radicans times radicans. So 5 times 5 would give us a 25. And the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 would give us the square root of 9. Now I go this term times the 6. So again, coefficients times coefficients. 5 times 6 gives us a positive. We got a positive here, so it's a plus 30, because 5 times 6 is 30. And then we have that square root of 3 here. Okay, now going to the other side, if we take negative 6 times 5 times the square root of 3, well, it's a negative times a positive, so that's going to be a negative 30. Negative 6 times 5 is negative 30. And we've got to bring that square root of 3 along to make it times the square root of 3. And then we've got negative 6 times positive 6. Well, negative times a positive makes it a negative, and 6 times 6 is 36. Okay, so now we're looking to simplify. Is there anything else we can do here? Well, I bet you some of you guys are jumping at that middle terms because you notice that, hey, these are opposite signs. One is plus 30, one is negative 30. So we can get rid of those, cancel them right out, because plus 30 times the square root of 3 and minus 30 times the square root of 3 would go to 0. So they're gone. That's nice. Square root of 9 we know can break down and make it a 3 because it's a perfect square. But what do we do with that 25 out in front? Remember, we have to multiply those. So 25 times 3 would give us 75. And we know these middle terms are gone. We're just left with this 36 to bring down. And now we can combine those two. 75 minus 36 is 39. That would be our final answer. So it's kind of a combination of some lessons that we've done in the past. Multiplying, which we did back in 10.2b, I think. And then combining like terms, which we did in 10.3a. And now we're just kind of combining them together. Okay? So that does it. Let's look at our lesson summary here. Explain in detail how to multiply radical terms. For example, this example here. Notice this is not a binomial. There's just two terms multiplying. I just want to, you don't have to do the problem. Just tell me how you would solve it. If it helps by doing the problem, great. But your practice problems, when you have to do here, multiply this. This is a binomial, two binomials. 2 plus the square root of 3 times 2 minus the square root of 3. And I'm a pretty strong bet here that you're going to get a regular old number with no radicals in it if you do things correctly. Okay? That's it for 10.3b. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.